Welcome to the second session of this day. And we are here to discuss a very important topic, the role of law in a changing society. So we are all here because we think law is essential. It's also multifaceted. For the purposes of this deliberation, let us look at law from 2 points of view. The first is that law is a kind of anchor that gives us the shoots and the roots to hold on to values that we deeply cherish when the world around us is spinning in a chaos. For just a mental imagery, if you guys have watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, Michelle Yeoh is rooted to her chair when everything around her is spinning. Today, that is how the world is. Around us, there are so many changes that are happening which take away some of our precious and closely held values, particularly in the area of social justice. All around us, there are values that are changing that include people who change gender orientation, people who change political orientations. There are people who also have issues with the way the Constitution is framed today. And there is climate change and AI, as we discussed in the session just before. And these are all challenges that, assault us today, to put it, rather bluntly. So where do we look for? Where do we seek assistance to hold on when this change is happening all around us? The second aspect is also something that we are going to discuss in depth today. It's about how law itself must change even as it remains our root and our anchor. It's not an easy thing to do, but today, to resolve these issues, we have a wonderful panel with us. We'll give about 10 minutes to each panelist, and then we'll open the floor out for discussions. I'm just going to give you a very, very brief, short introduction. So we'll start with Advocate Nagasaila. She is a civil rights activist. Many of us here in the audience might be familiar with her work. She is a lawyer at the Madras High Court, and she's been opposing state repression on behalf of dissidents, workers' unions, and marginalized minorities for over 3 decades. Ma'am, would you like to start?
Thank you, Ramya. I think from the previous session, AI, which has all been up there, it's a lot of technology and hi-fi. We are now coming back to terra firma, because now it's when we are looking at law and society, it's about you and me. Society is not something out there. It's really, I think each one of us are answerable, and we need to reflect on this question. While, yes, defining law, defining society is a big task in itself, and I wouldn't even want to attempt it in these 10 minutes. But what I would attempt to do, or at least what I intend at this point, is to just give each one of you a framework. I think young law students who are here, what is really important as a lawyer is to have a framework within which you understand a problem. In the absence of a framework, you may actually go all over the place and never really, zero in on what is the real issue. So now how do we look at a changing society? And what do we understand when we talk about the term of rule of law? And now how do we understand this intersection? So I am just attempting to give you a broad, from the time of Indian independence, let's look at it broadly, about 7.5 decades. If we were to broadly demarcate the first 2 decades as the decades when India has invested a lot in institution building, whether it was the legislature or the executive or the judiciary. And apart from him, these are the 3 wings we always hear as law students. I think from our 6th standard civics textbooks, these 3 things we keep hearing. But in addition to these institutions, there are a lot of other democratic institutions which we'll hear less about, which is the election commission, which is your finance commissions, your planning commissions, your your constitution. If you have that, if you have done that, the syllabus for that, you will find that the constitution itself has mandated many of these bodies which are essential to the running of a democracy. So the first 2 decades in India has been a challenge in terms of re-envisioning. Some of these, of course, existed even during the colonial era, but it was a question of redefining, reclaiming, and re-envisioning what each of these institutions should do. For instance, the Election Commission. At the time of independence, the literacy level in India was about 14%. And India had taken the bold step of universal adult suffrage much before many of the so-called developed nations. So which means you had a whole host of Indians who couldn't read and write, who were going to vote in a free India. Now how should an election commission then design its electoral process? It was a challenge. We had to rethink and reimagine what our country needs. And that's how we came across using symbols. You don't need to read and write to identify symbols. So that is how in India we have the symbols for each party. So the census, how do you take the census that we take every 10 years? The planning commissions to decide how and when and where we spend our money. Now these were all the various institutions which were being built, and each of these institutions were also testing waters. We were exploring the institutions, we were expanding them, and in many ways strengthening many of these institutions. So the first 2 decades was essentially decades of building these institutions, which are very essential for enforcement of the rule of law. The next 2 decades, I would say, started the decline, because somewhere I think the engagement of the citizenry, I think as Indians, the first generation, that is the generation which had fought for independence, they were far more engaged with the polity. They were far more engaged with the whole, I don't know how many of you have, it is generally not there in our textbooks, but when the Constituent Assembly was debating, it was not just the few elected members who were engaged with the constitution making process. Letters poured in from all parts of India, where each citizen was writing to the Constituent Assembly saying that, look here, we want you to take care of these interests. So that was the kind of participation that we saw from women's groups, from farmers groups, from trade unions, from ordinary workers. A lot of people participated even in the constitution making process. So that was the kind of engagement that the citizenry had. Then I think after the first 2 decades, the citizenry we all lapse into some kind of a complacency. Oh well, the government will do its job, the judiciary will do its job, and we'll carry on with our lives, and we'll make our neat packet of money and be happy with it. Each one live their own lives. But it doesn't work that way. A democracy doesn't work that way. It's only as good as what the citizens make of it. So the next 2 decades, I would broadly, and these are very broad categories, there's no big sanctity to it. This is just for a overall understanding, is the decline of institutions where, you had aberrations. We just looked at it as aberrations. We were not willing to actually fix them then and there. We were willing to turn the other way. We were willing to blink and let things go by. And we still carried on. And I think the last 2 decades, and more so in the last decade, we are seeing a dismantling and even a destruction of many of these institutions. And actually, I think if many of you, I don't know if in the Constitution syllabus, I don't know if the Constituent Assembly debates are part of the syllabus, which were not when we were doing law, but it should be, because if you haven't read, please go back to read at least the 2 speeches made by Dr. Ambedkar when he was introducing the Constitution and when we were adopting the Constitution, the draft Constitution. If you look at those speeches, Ambedkar actually alerts us to this possibility. He says, see, what I'm really worried is that India has lost its freedom earlier, not because of any external forces, but because of the treachery from among its own people. So he gives examples of commanders of various armies of the kings who received bribes and worked for the other side, or commanders who actually didn't do their job and were very silent when the enemy was attacking you. So this was a kind of treachery which was responsible for the loss of the independence in India. I mean, not India the way we know it, but he was giving a broad historical understanding of the people of India. So this is the treachery that I am worried about. That will we lose our independence once again, not because of any outside external aggression, but because the people, we the people of India, we would allow these institutions to crumble because of our own internal treacheries, if you want to call that. And treachery need not mean only in these extreme cases, indifference, failure to engage with the issues on hand. All this is part of it, and this is what Ambedkar warned us about it. And the other thing he warned us about is that while yes, we are entering a period of political equality, as far as social and economic equality is concerned, we are not, our Indian soil is rooted in inequality. And unless we as citizens address this inequality, we cannot hope for this country to survive the way it is. And to ensure that our constitution and the principles of the constitution are protected and we achieve or at least aim to go towards these constitutional goals. Now I think we are reading every day that as the millionaires and the billionaires in the country and in the world are increasing, the inequality is higher than ever it was before. The fact that people are more and more alienated from their own resources. I think even 2 days back the headlines was about 30 Maoists, you will find it within brackets, which is mostly women who were killed in the tribal areas. So the disenfranchisement of tribals, of women, of the poor, the urban poor, all this I think is still has not been addressed, and this is what exactly the concern expressed by Ambedkar when he introduces the draft constitution. So I would really urge each one of you to go back and revisit Ambedkar. And as Ramya had mentioned in her introductory speeches, today we have commentators talking about how, the constitution should be changed because it's a relic of the colonial era. But Ambedkar has answered it. It was a criticism which was leveled against him when the constitution was drafted. And he very squarely and clearly meets this argument and he says, we are not the first constitution that is being written. Constitutions have been written and in existence for hundreds of years before the Indian constitution was framed. And it's, only logical, reasonable, and I think what any common sense person would do is to look to the history, look to the past, learn from it, make your adaptations, make our corrections, do our customizations. It doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel. So just because we have not reinvented the wheel, it doesn't mean that, it's a relic of the colonial era. So I think all these debates, you will find answers if we go back to the Constituent Assembly debates, because all these issues were debated at length at that time. Now coming back to now what is the society, what is the change that we are seeing in society today? As I said, one is the dismantling of our institutions. We haven't had census being taken for the last, after 2011 we have not had a census taken. So now what is our planning all about? How are we ever going to even the basic thing as planning our economy? We are in a world where on one hand you are talking of AI and data analytics, but here we are a country who is afraid of data. We don't want to even secure data. So that is the reality which we are living in. So what is the analytics that we are going to do without even authentic data? That is a harsh reality. Look at our, the SEBI, the scams are all over the place. Even if you are looking at, I am not even going to the executive, the legislature and the judiciary. I am talking of the more everyday institutions which impact our everyday lives, which is your markets. We have seen the scam around the chairperson of SEBI. We have seen now the entire distrust which is building up over the election commission, where today in every citizen's mind, at the end of an election being declared, there is in the back of our mind, was it a fair count? Is it a fair election or has there been a manipulation? So I think that is the biggest threat to our democracy and the society, because there is an element of distrust of and mistrust of institutions in every walk of our life. Not just institutions, but even our professionals. You go to a doctor, do you trust the medicines that the doctor is prescribing? Do we trust the diagnostics the doctors are giving? There's an element of distrust. Am I being given some unnecessary diagnostics? Am I being prescribed drugs which are not required because the pharmacies are, wanting to meet their targets? You go to the judiciary, you don't know when your case will be taken up. Even if it is heard, it's not unknown that clients very often come and tell us, oh, do this, try and do this case before a particular judge, or don't do it before a particular judge. Or, they will tell you that if you go to the Supreme Court, which judge, which lawyer should be engaged before which court. That's a done thing. It's out there. Everybody will tell you. Tell me which court and I will tell you which senior to engage. All this doesn't bode well for any of us. It doesn't bode well for our democracy. It doesn't bode well for our country. And it doesn't bode well for us as citizens. I think this is the society, this is the change that we are seeing in society. And how do we address these issues? It's not going to get fixed on its own. It's not going to be fixed by our leaders, whether it is the politicians or the bureaucrats, because they are the problem. So if the solution can only be from us, we the citizens of India. So if you're going back to the preamble, so I think our answers are in going back to the Constitution, going back to the values of the preamble, going back to see how much of all of us are living by the values of the preamble. We need to reclaim the preamble. Please go back and read it and reread it and reread it. I think a time has come that if each one of us do not take our Constitution seriously and do not strive to imbibe the values and ethics of the Constitution in our everyday lives. It's not about just Constitution is not for lawyers, it's not for lawmakers, it's not for judges, and it's not for the courtrooms. Constitution is something which is valuable for each one of us in our everyday lives. And more so, I see a lot of women students, very happy to see a lot of young women students, law students here. For women, I think more than ever, Constitution values begins at home. The principles of equality, liberty, for women it begins right at home. How many women enjoy that in your own home spaces? How safe are homes for women? No, these are all the questions which each one of us have to engage with. And as citizens, I think the time is up for us to be complacent. The time is up for us to allow just our parliamentarians and the bureaucrats, the IAS and the IPSs to decide our future. I think unless all of us wake up to the fact that any country is only as good as we the citizens make it. And if we do not take the effort to engage in the Constitution, in the lawmaking, in what's happening in the country, I think we may end up losing these hard-won freedoms that we have taken for granted. And I'm afraid, our generation took it for granted and we have enjoyed the best of it, but not so your generation. You're being picked up for, a WhatsApp post or a Twitter post or whatever. So you're living where all your rights, which are enshrined in Part 3, we are in danger of fast losing them. And unless we the people, which is each one of us, I think take charge and learn to actively engage in the whole process of social change, I think we have a lot to lose. I think with that, we'll wait for the question answer session.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think if law gives us a grounding, ma'am has just given us a grounding into 7 decades of law in India, and a very rousing speech at that. We will move on to our next speaker. Shabnam Banu has been practicing in the Madras High Court for the last 13 years. In 2015, she started her independent practice and further progressed to setting up her own firm in the year 2020. She is now the proprietor and advocate of Shabnam Banu and Associates with a competent team of associates and lawyers. She always believes in a dynamic practice of law, and she says, she embraces the march of law.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Firstly, before I start, I just wanted to say that change is the only constant is what has been told, and we all know that. In fact, the discussions that we are having since morning and, the topics that are being put up here, I think it all stems from the topic that we are now discussing, because if not for those changes, I don't think we will even have those discussions, because back like in 20 years back or something, I don't even think these topics would have been a matter of concern or prominence, gained any kind of prominence. So I think it stems from the fact that there is so much of change in the society. According to me, I think society and the law go hand in hand. In fact, law is in place to ensure that the society is also in place. And by society, I mean you, me, and everybody, which includes everything that governs us in terms of the regulations, the laws, the code of conduct, etc., etc. Now, when we talk about the changes that we see, I think we can trace back to the times that we had the abolition of the sati system, which was in the 1800s. It started at that point of time. And till today, we see a lot of changes. Now, the issue is that each time when there is a change, okay, I don't think everybody accepts to it. Like she pointed out, it affects somebody's value in some way. But you know what? To curb this and to eliminate this, the laws are in place and the changes are brought in, because what is equal to someone is unequal to somebody else. So when we start off from the judgments of this sati system and all of that, today we come to a point where we understand that laws are in place and it is changing to uphold something as important as your fundamental right, as well as something as trivial as conducting or controlling or regulating your behavior with your neighbor. Sounds very silly, but it is true. Laws are in place to ensure that every facet of your life, from the time you move out of your house until you reach here, from the traffic violations and the people you meet and what you do and how you behave in a certain place, whether this constitutes unlawful assembly or is it an assembly for the right cause, everything is governed by the law. Now, when we talk about where this starts, I think as students sitting here, I would like to resonate more with this crowd to make you all understand that what is the changes that actually you guys could see. This starts from somewhere where my learned senior was mentioning about the constitutional changes, which I do not want to get into. So it starts from those decades. And today we are here where we are talking about how, for example, a child is born. A child is then going to school. When you go to school, what are your rights? What are your duties? Then you go to college. What are your rights? What are your duties there? And then it goes on to your employment and your opportunities that's available over there, and how equality should be given and how you should fight for your rights. I think laws play a major role. I think one important judgment that I just wanted to point out without delving into the facts of the judgment is that I think it was one social change which happened in Vishaka versus the state of Rajasthan that culminated into a statute that said that, protection of women at workplace. It started from there. It was one inequality that took place there that came here. Now next, traversing to the Sabrimala judgment, for example, I don't think everybody is agreeable with that. Each one has their own view. The minute a judgment is out, it ignites a lot of criticism from different people. Now, what is right for you may not be right for somebody else. When Banu's case happened back in the time, Muslim men were completely against it. It sparked so much of controversy, saying that it overlaps into our personal laws. But then you have to understand that if we are living in a democratic country where we talk about equality, it is very important that these laws are in place where everyone can make a claim to it equally. For example, when we are talking about tech, when that discussion was brought before this forum and everybody was talking, when one student pointed out a question, I don't think back in the time, 10 years back, I would be able to answer that because I don't know what it is. When I studied law, I don't think competition law was there in place. But today we have so many changes. And now these changes give room for a lot of good things and the bad thing. While I say that the Vishaka guidelines led to a particular statute, today there is a change where we also talk about how women should not misuse that statute. When you say there are dowry prohibition laws, or you're saying there is, your assertion towards fundamental rights, you want to invoke your rights, you want to assert them, you should ensure that you do not, after a point, misuse this particular provision, because this changes are brought to help you reach a better place and to have a very civil form. In fact, I would like to quote an example. There is this movie, I don't know how many of you have watched it. It's called The Purge. So this movie was released, I think, in 2013. It's a very interesting concept where this movie talks about where the government gives 1 day leave in a year. It's called the annual purge, wherein you're allowed to do whatever you want. You can kill people, you can steal, you can break houses, you can do whatever you want. And that movie talks about how families protect themselves inside the houses. Now just imagine, all of us have some thoughts in our mind which may not be right, okay? We are angry with somebody, we want to lash out at them. There are different things that we could do. But just imagine if there was no law and order. Just imagine with evolving mindsets, if there were no changes, what would happen to this society? When Menaka Gandhi's case was taken up as a very big example when you spoke about personal liberty, today we have come to a position where two people, FIR has been registered because they spoke something which was very inappropriate in a stage. So I think this is the change that we are talking about, because when we talk about change, it is very important to know that we have to adapt the change in the right way. Just because there is a change, it doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want. So the change is subject to a lot of responsibilities that should stem within us and our conduct in the public. While I look at codes, okay, for example, like my learned senior just pointed out, she spoke about, the respect towards women, or how you're supposed to conduct, where it starts at home. Like we say, charity begins at home. I think I have a view personally, it may not be agreeable to everybody. I feel women empowerment at large is practiced more in courts than in your houses, where it should be the otherwise. If women empowerment began at your own houses, I don't think we need to reach courts. Because today courts think that awarding maintenance is the only form of empowerment that women can have. At the same time, that should not also be misused, because today there is a change in the society because the statutes protect you, but that doesn't mean it should be taken against the other clan. It should not be used against the other clan. So while we speak about all of this, we also go into other judgments that brought a revolutionary change. For example, going back to the Sabrimala judgment, I don't know how effective was the judgment today implemented. Even today, we have so many review petitions pending, challenging the very same verdict, saying that it is still not possible because the society has to accept to it. So, like I said, not everyone can accept. If it's something to do with a particular community, like it happened in Banu's case, I don't think everyone was agreeable to it. People said, no, you're just, you're invading into the privacy and the customary practice of a particular community. But it is not so, because when you're talking about liberation, you're talking about changes, I think that should be equally applicable to everybody else, okay? So while we speak about the changes in the society, we also have to adapt to the fact that these changes are subject to the fact that it is used in the right manner and it's manured in the form that we can progress through it. So each change that, for example, you're taking a house today, the tenancy laws are very important to protect you over there. When you go to a job, you attend an interview, you ensure that, or let's say it's a government job, you ensure that, all the set practices of where we preach about the fundamental rights are practiced in real. Essentially, it should be applied. And now the courts come into the picture. When we talk about this role, when there is a violation or there is a breach of these particular rights and duties that we're talking about, courts come into the play. Imagine if courts did not pass verdicts. Where would this culminate into the change that we are talking? It is one thing that there is a verdict and the change has not been implemented, but it's absolutely another thing when these changes are brought by court, and it is the moral and the bounded and the legal duty of everybody to ensure that we are subjected to it and we follow it and we implement it. So while today all the students who are sitting over here, I just want to address something very important. When, like she pointed out in my introduction, I believe we should be the change we want to see. Because I've had experiences in the kind of work, the body of work that I have done, where I have reached a dead end, where I don't know that no precedent is helping me. Because every time, like our senior Mr. Arima Sundaram pointed out this morning, it was a very impactful speech I felt. He said, you can't always rely on judgments. If you're having a legal issue to decide tomorrow and it's about a social change and you don't have anything to rely on, are you going to say that you're not going to take up that matter because you don't have a precedent to rely? It is not so. Because sometimes you have to make the precedent. It is very important that we set the precedents, because someone somewhere set some precedent, that's why we are sitting here and we are talking about it. So likewise, when we deal with issues, it is very important that you need to be the change you want to see. It is one thing to keep preaching, within the box of what is always set for you, but it is absolutely another thing where you want to see the change that you want to be, and it only starts when young minds come up with, with all the equipped knowledge that you guys derive from these topics and these laws and everything, which I don't think people from the older generation can do, because now we are going to the point where technology is reached to an extent that your thinking ability begins at a point where mine might perhaps end, because you have all the exposure, you have the resources. Because back in the college when we studied, speaking about the role, we never had any exposure that you guys have today. What you're exposed today at this point, whichever year you're studying in, I had no clue in my final year of college or until I became an advocate. So I think you are so blessed to have that kind of exposure to know what is what. Growing from the times where we did not know the jargons of law and we had to go under a senior to learn the basic criteria. Today you are well equipped to know half of the things, and what you need to put to use is now the practical aspects of that. What you are taught in your in your colleges about the roles and the changes and all of that is just theoretical. But all this can take effect and form only when you put it to practice, and that can happen only when you want to be the change. Sometimes it takes a robust move and the step forward to decide that this is the change that I want to bring. Because recently when I was overwhelmed when I read one of the recent judgments of the Supreme Court that spoke about a lady who's a journalist who filed a case before the Supreme Court challenging the discrimination in the prison. Gone are the days where we used to fight discrimination, caste discrimination in the society. Never ever did I think that there was caste discrimination inside the prison. And it is so important to have this uniform code, because I do understand that we can't eradicate this, okay? We can talk, we can say it's all nice, but we all know that there is an underlying problem. But beyond that, I think somewhere you need to bring in the change that you want to see. And most importantly, when there is a change, it requires a very broader outlook to adapt to the changes. I think that's very important.
Thank you so much. So, 2 out of 3 speakers have effectively lobbed the ball back at us. It's a responsibility of us as citizens. It's a responsibility as students, as lawyers, as journalists, just as residents of this country. We'll now move on to our third speaker for the day. Following which we'll open it up for questions. Dr. E. Prema is a professor and assistant dean at VIT School of Law, Vellore Institute of Technology, Chennai. She specializes in international law, climate and environmental law, and human rights. Her research focuses on climate justice, state responsibility, and legal frameworks for sustainability. Over to you.
Thank you, Ramya, for this wonderful introduction. And I'm very honored to be in this all-women session because VIT and also Hindu were very specific of having this all-women session, and which shows the equality, equity, and also inclusivity, everything together. So that is wonderful. With the opinions which my fellow panelists were expressing their views as a practitioner of law, what I observe, or currently what I do my research in, is the outer space laws. So to me, law not only protects the interest of people, rights of people, but also provides opportunity. So outer space is one such kind of sector where I just understand that the policy level frameworks, or how it is going to be the international frameworks, not even reaching the national legislation, had provided opportunities, specifically including women to it. So one example I could give you, where we were for all this time, or the previous panel was discussing about the technology AI, as my fellow panelists were also telling that it's very complicated. If it is going to be for my fellow panelists, it's too complicated for me. At least 25 years before I did my law graduation, and now I'm talking about outer space laws. So this one is one I could see how it is going to be educational institution, the society, and how it is going to be law which is providing opportunity apart from age. Your interest in learning and your intention changing the society is much important. So in that line, I would just give you an example. I don't know how many of the students here know that. The director of United Nations Outer Space, Office of Outer Space, is one woman named Miss Aarti Hola. She is of Indian origin. And now she is in a leadership position, which is a position where she decides. You know, it's not only with her regime, but she provides opportunity. She is in a position where you could very, openly can see how leadership given to women can change many of the things. Because when I have been to such kind of conference, previously 10 years before, that was not the same. It was only, sorry to say, use that word, white men, and also only men were there. But after the leadership changes, she very silently, and also with the policy level changes, including women to it, had provided opportunity not only to the European and American countries' women, but also women from South Asia and also Asia. See, as my fellow panelists were talking about how opportunities can make social changes, we have to become the change. We have to understand, adapt changes. It is not sometimes your cup of tea to decide upon. Sometimes it is very tough. And then comes the change. So we should not be hesitant in taking up new things, trying to read. Maybe sometimes I'm very slow and the younger people are much faster than me. That is not going to be a hindrance, while it is going to be you talking about changes. What I can assure you is, law is something which doesn't make society to fit in. It is providing the society how the changes are going upon, which is unavoidable. There is no bar. You cannot restrict the social change. So it is, the changes are unavoidable, and the law provides, as you could also remember Justice Chandrachud explaining how it is going to be just reversing the judgments which is given earlier, and now it is been changed to it. Right, it is because they don't say that it is wrong. They are changing it. The judgments gives an opportunity that it is the necessity of the society, and the same need to be understood. So one classic example I could give you, where I have just studied this 2022 NASA's equity action plan. It's wonderful. It was amazing to see, and it was mind-blowing, where this one is not just a policy. As we know, we always think that only legislations and constitutional guarantees protect women or provide gender equity, but this is an action plan where it is showcasing itself. For instance, one of the provisions in that talks about equity. It includes gender equality and also unrepresented, the people unrepresented. So they use these terms, which is very, very important, which is inclusive of many things. And it shows the changes provided. It includes provisions which shows internal accountability, external accountability, and also what is the progress. These two are the important, over this action plan. What internally they do for the equity, achieving the equity, and what externally they establish to the society, and what is the follow-up which is open to all the public. It's not, just like that, a policy which is being framed, which is important for the changing society, and they want to show off that we are the pioneering country which is making inclusivity and also equity is being there. But the document is very open, where the changes which it is made in the policy level is being achieved. So such kind of things can be done, as there have to be a comprehensive understanding between the younger generation and also the experienced people who can just make certain kinds of encouragement to the younger generation. So that is from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much. How many of you had heard of the UN Office of Outer Space before this? Certainly not me. But let's move on to the questions now. Please put your hands up, and Mike, yeah.
So Shabnam ma'am has spoken about how we need to be the change that we want to see. When we talk about change in the society, the role of policymakers is very prominent, right? They decide what policies are drafted according to the changes that take place in the society. So in such a case, what do we do about the inherent biases that these policymakers might have, and what do we do about these biases bleeding into the policies that they do end up drafting, and the effect that these biases have on the changing society? Because by having such biases and by not breaking out of their mold, they're essentially preventing or hindering progress, right? So what do we do about that in such a case?
Yeah, can I? So firstly, the question that you asked is a very good one. To begin with, I think even the policy makers are human beings after all, right? So I'm sure in this panel, all four of us may have different opinions about different things, okay? To start off, to answer your question, while you speak about a policy, how sure are you that no policy has been changed till now? Are you saying all policies that were in place from the very beginning have been stagnant till today and there has been no change? Because if it is so, we won't have the LGBTQ judgment today. Without giving my reservations on what I feel about it, I'm just talking from the legal point of view. If that was the case, we would not have something like that. In fact, when our former Chief Justice, Honorable Mr. Chandrachud, appeared this morning and he was talking about a lot of things, do you even know that how many of his father's judgments did he overturn? Now, when you talk about policy, where is this put to test? It's put to test in the society. When it's put to test in the society, what is the next step of it? When the society is not satisfied with something or there's something unequal in it, where does it go? It goes back to the court. The court comes back with a verdict. This verdict has to be implemented, and when there is a public outrage where you know that rights are affected to such an extent, what happens next? Then the policy has to either be scrapped down or it has to be modified, or you have to bring in some change to go with the society, because the law and the society walks hand in hand. And when I talk about law, I also talk about policy. And when we talk about these judgments, this is not the only one. Like going back to the Sabrimala, what a big change that must have been in the society, especially in the Hindu community. You can't imagine talking about a woman going to the Sabrimala temple. What outrage did it create? How many people will be agreeable? When you talk about the LGBTQ judgment today, as people, we are sitting here and we are explaining and we are, debating it. Will your parents actually be okay with it? We are not too sure. Now, just because our parents are not okay with it doesn't mean that is not right for a particular community. When COVID happened, I still remember while working in the Learned Advocate General's office, there was an issue that cropped up where a couple of, incentives were given, okay, to the public, because if they had an Aadhaar card, they would get it. That time there was a bill that was filed where they said, what about transgenders? They don't have an Aadhaar card. How would they get this money? Now, if you look at it, what does the preamble of every act talk about? Let's go to the matrimonial laws. It says man and woman should be married. It says the man is this, woman is this. Now, how will a transgender go claim this in an Aadhaar card when there is no laws in place? Then there was Grace Banu, one particular person who filed this particular public interest litigation, and she got an order favorable to her. Like that, there are many things that has been challenged, okay? So when you talk about where the law has said that a man and a woman, and when we're coming to a sea change of discussing issues like the LGBTQ judgment, or we're talking about the Sabrimala case, and we're talking about single mothers adopting kids, we're talking about the surrogacy bills, don't you think that we have come really far from the very narrow outlook of the policy making, and today we have come to the place where there are indeed changes. Maybe if you look further, you will know. Now, what is your role in this? Maybe tomorrow when you become an advocate, if you have a client who's coming to you and this client is telling you, I want to challenge something which is not as a part of the law, you must ensure that you do it for them. Whether you fail or no is not the point, but you at least tried. Because back in 2018, when there was a single mother who came to me, she said, nobody is willing to take up my case because you know what, I want this name of this father that is put in the birth certificate to be removed. Why she wanted to be removed? One is because she's a single mother. Two, the name of the father that is put is wrong. It is a friend who accompanied her. When we met the authorities, she was a woman herself. She said, no, we need a name. It's okay, let the name be. So she didn't care if the wrong name was there. All that she wanted was a name should be there. Guess what? I fought it out. I went to the court, and Madras High Court happened to be the first to set out a precedent where they said that a single mother doesn't require a father's name in the birth certificate, and India had its first birth certificate without the father's name. So I've been there, I've seen it, which is why I'm telling that to you. And I think you can also do it. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Just to add to what Shabnam has said, you're right that policy makers are very often can be biased, especially in instances of men. We are living in a patriarchal society. So there is a patriarchal mindset, and it has never been very easy to make changes in policy. But for instance, if you go back to the Constitution, there has been a recent book on the mothers of the Indian Constitution. We only hear of the fathers, but there is a book on the mothers. That is the women who have contributed to the Constitution making process. And if you go back to Article 25, which talks about the right to freedom to practice and propagate religion, this clause had come up under much debate and opposition by the women Constituent Assembly members, saying that ultimately a lot of the rights of women are subjugated only on account of religion, and religious practices are often very anti-women. So that is why if you see the Article 25, it starts is subject to public order, morality and health. So they try to restrict that right and also subject to Part 3 and to subject to other provisions of Part 3. Now these clauses were brought in only because of the mothers of the Indian Constitution, because they were very aware that what it would mean when if you give people the freedom to practice religion. So again, coming back to the rape cases, on the whole issue of consent, it did not happen overnight. A lot of women's organizations have worked on it, have demanded, have lobbied, have protested, there have been campaigns. That is what has brought in the changes to rape law. When you're looking at the SC/ST Atrocities Act, again it didn't happen just because of the goodwill of or the good-heartedness or the large-heartedness of the lawmakers. It came after a lot of protests. Going back to workers' bills, whether all the bills pertaining to unorganized labor, the construction workers, migrant labor. Though, during COVID time, we have all been witness to these large, thousands and lakhs of migrant workers walking across the length of India, and many of them dying in the process. And nobody ever debated that there is a Migrant Workers Act in this country. I think even the lawmakers, even the labor commissioners, nobody knew about this law. Nobody looked at it because nobody ever enforced and implemented the law. So yes, you are very right. There is a bias not only just in policy making, there is a bias in enforcement. So again, the ball is back in our court. It's for us to ensure that we influence our policy makers, we make our voices heard, and after the law is passed, it's for us to ensure that it is enforced.
Thank you, ma'am.
We have time for one question, maybe.
Good afternoon, ma'am. So my question is in relation to social media. So my generation and many more people are extremely online right now, and we can see that most of the information and almost all of the content that we consume is from social media. And this has also created many echo chambers where people on their online selves are much more likely to spread a lot of hate and vitriol towards women and other marginalized communities without much consequences because they believe it doesn't have an effect on real life. So, and all of this hate is beginning to translate, especially I've seen in my own school, the students are beginning to speak in a very hate-filled manner, and all of this is can be rooted back to the social media content they consume. So do you believe that moderation of social media is the only way that we can curb this, or is there a more of a role that the law can play in society and like changing and giving more digital literacy? So do you think that only moderation is the solution, or is there something else we can do to understand the effect that social media is having on the mindsets of young people now?
I think I would go for digital literacy and critical thinking, because any moderation in terms of lawmakers, today there is an attempt that, we are seeing any posts which are not so, if our politicians or our rulers or whoever the powers that be are not very happy, immediately they are pulled down. That's happening day and out. And when the power to moderate is given to somebody who may not always be neutral, and especially if it's a person in power and control, then I think it goes back to our fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression. The right to freedom of expression itself, you have seen the limitations in Article 19, that there are certain limitations, and I think as citizens, we need to actually critically engage with those limitations. And yes, there is a problem here in terms of, living in the virtual world. I think most of you must be hearing it from your mothers because I also have daughters your age. But yes, it is a problem that, very often that the current generation believes that the virtual world, we call you all the internet warriors. We don't find anybody coming onto the roads. Everybody is happy to sit in the drawing rooms and, make a post or maybe a like or some emoji, and you think that's it, you have done your bit. It's definitely not enough. First, yes, your engagement is very limited. It is in a very many ways very artificial. So it is an artificial world which has been created by the virtual media, and I think there is a danger that, of course, now there's enough information also coming in about addiction and how your brains are getting rewired, because there is an inability to engage with an issue in the long term, because now we are used to this 30-second bites. When it was the television, we were looking at 1-minute bites. Today I am told that anything more than 30 seconds, it doesn't hold the attention of your generation. Now in 30 seconds, what is the kind of engagement that any of you can wish for? Can you talk of women's rights in 30 seconds? Can you engage with that issue? Can you look at the constitution in 30 seconds? So unless all of you reflect on it, maybe meet physically, not virtually, and debate about the problems of the virtual world. Talk about the hate speech. Would we say this to anybody when we are face to face? We wouldn't do that. But behind the screen, in the comfort of your bedroom, in the privacy of your house, in the anonymity of that space, we sometimes get emboldened to do things which otherwise when we are face to face, our other senses kick in. We are a lot more restrained because the person is physically present in front of you. We are more mindful of their sensibilities, their sensitivities, their feelings, all of which are numbed when we are behind a screen. So I think that is a debate which all of us, and especially because I find that, in fact, I went to the extent of having to delete my Twitter app because I just found that I can just spend hours just doing this. And and a lot of productive time is wasted. So I just realized that I'm just wasting a lot of time. And I deleted that app because I know the temptation is there. Even now, you must have seen me pick up the phone and look at it. At my age, I was not born with this. But yes, there is a temptation to see, okay, are there any messages which I need to respond to, any emails which have come in. So this is a constant struggle, I think, which all of us, and especially your generation, will have to engage with. So I think it's a very important question that you have raised. But I really have no answers.
So thank you very much to my panelists and for this all-woman panel today. Thank you so much for coming.